The invitation arrived in a thick white envelope with golden letters pressed into the paper. When Maria first held it in her hands, she ran her fingers slowly across the elegant writing, almost afraid she might smudge it. Her daughter's wedding. For a long moment, she simply stood in the doorway of her tiny apartment, staring at the card like it was something fragile and precious. Her eyes blurred with tears she didn't want to cry. After all these years, she whispered to herself. Maria had imagined this day countless times when her daughter was still a little girl with messy pigtails and scraped knees. Back then, she used to picture a bright church, a smiling bride, and herself sitting proudly in the front row. But life had not been kind to Maria. She had raised her 2 children alone after their father disappeared when they were still young. She worked wherever someone would hire her, cleaning houses, washing dishes in restaurants, sometimes even night shifts at a factory. There were winters when the heating barely worked. There were nights when Maria pretended she had already eaten so the children could have the last portion of food. But she never complained, because every sacrifice she made was for them. And now her daughter was getting married. The wedding venue was far grander than anything Maria had ever seen. A massive hotel ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers that sparkled like stars above the guests. White roses decorated every table, and soft music floated through the air as waiters moved gracefully between people dressed in expensive suits and designer gowns. Maria stood near the entrance, clutching her small purse nervously. Her dress was simple, dark blue, neatly pressed, but clearly not something bought from a luxury boutique like the outfits around her. Still, she had spent nearly 3 months saving for it. She had wanted to look nice for her daughter. Guests walked past her, laughing, greeting one another warmly. Some glanced at Maria for a brief moment before quickly looking away. She wasn't used to places like this. Taking a slow breath, she approached the large seating chart placed near the entrance. Rows of names were printed carefully beneath elegant table numbers. Maria traced her finger down the list until she finally found her name. Table 27. She looked around the hall. Table 1 stood near the stage, surrounded by important-looking guests. Table 5 was close to the dance floor, but table 27, it was far in the back, very far. Maria walked slowly toward it, weaving between tables filled with smiling families and friends. Then she noticed something strange. The farther she walked, the quieter the room became. The music still played, but the laughter faded. Finally, she reached the end of the ballroom, and there it was. A small round table with 2 chairs placed awkwardly near a narrow hallway. A hallway that led directly to the restrooms. Every few seconds, guests passed through it. The door swung open and closed with soft creaks. Maria stopped walking. For a moment, she simply stared at the table. Maybe there had been a mistake. Maybe someone moved the signs. Slowly, she checked the card placed on the table. Her name was printed clearly on it. Maria, no last name, just Maria. Her chest tightened slightly, but she forced herself to smile. "It's all right," she murmured quietly. "At least I'm here." She pulled out the chair and sat down. From where she sat, she could barely see the stage. Most of the room was hidden behind tall flower arrangements and pillars, but she could still hear the music. And she could see her daughter. Across the ballroom, the bride stood surrounded by bridesmaids in shining dresses. Her white gown shimmered under the lights. Maria felt warmth spread through her chest, despite everything. "She looks beautiful," she whispered. For a moment, all the exhaustion from years of hard work seemed worth it. A few minutes later, someone approached her table. Maria looked up and saw a tall man in an expensive gray suit. Her daughter's groom, Daniel. He looked around quickly, making sure no one was paying attention. Then he leaned down close to Maria so only she could hear him. His voice was soft but cold. "Listen," he whispered. Maria straightened slightly. "We can't seat you with the main guests." She blinked in confusion. Daniel interrupted her before she could speak. "You're too poor," he said bluntly. "It would make things uncomfortable for my family. The words landed like stones in Maria's chest. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Daniel straightened his tie and glanced toward the ballroom. "Just stay here, all right," he continued quietly. "Try not to draw attention to yourself." Maria felt her hands tighten in her lap. Images flashed through her mind. Her daughter as a baby, working late nights while the children slept, selling her wedding ring when money ran out, skipping meals, smiling even when she was exhausted, all for them, and now she was being hidden beside a restroom. Daniel gave her a brief, polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. Then he walked away as if nothing had happened. Maria stared at the empty chair across from her. The hallway door opened again. A guest walked past, barely noticing her. For a moment, Maria thought she might cry, but she quickly wiped her eyes. No, she whispered to herself. She would not ruin her daughter's wedding, even if her heart felt like it had cracked in two. Several minutes passed. Guests filled the ballroom with laughter and conversation. Music grew louder as the celebration continued. Maria sat quietly at her table, trying to look like she belonged there. Then suddenly someone pulled out the chair across from her. Maria looked up in surprise. A man in a black suit sat down. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with a calm confidence that immediately felt different from everyone else in the room. His suit looked expensive, but his smile was warm. He leaned slightly toward Maria and spoke softly. "Let's pretend we're old friends." Maria blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry," she said gently. The man glanced around the ballroom for a moment before looking back at her. "Just trust me," he said quietly. Then he picked up a glass of water from the table and raised it slightly like they were celebrating something. Across the room, Maria's son suddenly froze. He had just turned toward the back of the ballroom, and the moment he saw the man sitting beside his mother, the color drained from his face. His glass slipped slightly in his hand, because he recognized that man, and seeing him sitting beside his mother was the last thing he expected in the world. Maria sat stiffly in her chair, still trying to understand what had just happened. The man across from her adjusted the cuff of his black suit calmly, as if sitting beside the restroom at the very back of a luxury wedding was the most normal thing in the world. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The restroom door opened again behind Maria, and two guests walked past, laughing loudly before disappearing back into the bright ballroom. Maria cleared her throat gently. "I think you might be sitting at the wrong table," she said politely. The man smiled. "No," he replied softly. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Maria studied him more closely now. He looked to be in his early 50s. His hair was slightly silver at the temples, neatly combed back. His black suit fit him perfectly, the kind of suit that was clearly tailored. But what stood out the most was the calm confidence in his eyes. He didn't seem embarrassed by the table. He didn't seem bothered by the hallway. If anything, he looked completely comfortable. Maria folded her hands together. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't think we've met before." The man chuckled quietly. "That's true." Then he leaned slightly closer and lowered his voice. "But tonight, let's just pretend we have." Maria frowned slightly, confused. Before she could ask another question, a waiter suddenly appeared beside their table. Not just any waiter. It was the head waiter a man Maria had seen earlier carefully greeting the most important guests near the front tables. The waiter's posture was stiff now. "Good evening, sir," he said respectfully to the man in the black suit. Maria noticed something strange. The waiter wasn't even looking at her. His entire attention was focused on the man sitting across from her. "Would you like anything special this evening?" the waiter asked. The man smiled politely. "Just bring whatever everyone else is having." "Of course, sir." The waiter nodded quickly and left. Maria blinked. "That was strange," she murmured. The man raised an eyebrow slightly. "How so?" "Well, he seemed very nervous," Maria said. The man chuckled again. Some people worry too much about appearances. Maria wasn't sure what he meant. But something about this situation felt unusual. Across the ballroom, music began playing louder as the guests gathered near the dance floor. Laughter echoed across the hall, but every now and then Maria noticed someone glancing toward their table. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd because people had started noticing something odd, the man in the black suit. Several guests seemed to recognize him. One woman gasped quietly. A man near the bar leaned toward his friend and whispered something urgently. Maria noticed the growing attention and shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "I think people are looking at you," she said softly. "They probably are," the man replied casually. Maria hesitated. "I'm Maria," she said after a moment. The man's smile softened. "I know." Her eyes widened slightly. "You do, yes." He reached across the table and gently shook her hand. "My name is Victor." His handshake was warm and firm. Maria felt a strange sense of familiarity, though she couldn't explain why. "I'm sorry about your seat," Victor said quietly. Maria looked down at the tablecloth. "Oh, it's fine," she replied quickly. Victor tilted his head slightly. "You don't have to pretend with me." Maria gave a small, tired smile. "It's my daughter's wedding," she said. "I don't want to cause problems." Victor studied her face for a moment. "You raised her alone, didn't you?" Maria froze. "How did you know that?" Victor leaned back slightly in his chair. "Sometimes you can see strength in someone's eyes," he said simply. Maria didn't know what to say. For a moment, silence settled between them again. Then Victor spoke. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "some of the most important people in the world are often placed in the worst seats." Maria laughed softly. "Well, if that's true, then I must be extremely important tonight." Victor's eyes twinkled. "You have no idea." Across the room, Maria's son Daniel stood near the bar with several guests. But he wasn't laughing anymore. He wasn't even listening to the conversation around him. His eyes were locked on the back table. On his mother and the man sitting with her. Sweat had begun forming on his forehead. One of his friends nudged him. "Hey, isn't that—" "Don't," Daniel interrupted quickly. His voice was tense, very tense, because he knew exactly who that man was. And there was only one question racing through his mind now. Asterisk, asterisk, why was he sitting next to his mother? Asterisk, asterisk, back at table 27, Maria noticed something else. The staff had suddenly begun bringing dishes to their table first. Fresh bread, sparkling water, even a small plate of appetizers that none of the nearby tables had received yet. Maria looked around in confusion. "I think they're giving us the wrong service," she whispered. Victor smiled calmly. "No," he said, "they're giving you the service you deserve." Maria looked down at the table again, unsure what to think. Then she asked the question that had been sitting quietly in her mind. "Victor, are you a friend of my daughter?" Victor shook his head slowly. "No." "Then how do you know me?" Victor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked across the ballroom toward Maria's son. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Daniel immediately looked away. Victor's smile faded slightly. Then he turned back to Maria. "Let's just say," he said softly, "that years ago you did something kind for someone who desperately needed it." Maria frowned. "I helped many people when I could," Victor nodded. "That's exactly why I'm here." Maria opened her mouth to ask another question. But before she could speak, the band suddenly stopped playing. The microphone on the stage crackled to life. Everyone in the ballroom turned toward the front. The groom's father stepped onto the stage with a nervous smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we have a very special guest with us tonight." Maria barely paid attention at first. But then the man continued speaking. "This guest is someone our family deeply respects, a man whose business empire has changed industries around the world." Whispers spread through the crowd. Maria noticed Victor sitting quietly beside her, completely relaxed. "Tonight," the groom's father continued proudly, "we are honored that he accepted our invitation." Maria slowly turned her head toward Victor. Something in her chest suddenly felt strange. The man on stage lifted the microphone again. "And now I'd like to personally welcome Mr. Victor Hale." The entire room gasped. Every head turned. Not toward the stage, but toward the back of the ballroom, toward the tiny table beside the restroom, where Victor sat calmly beside Maria, and across the room Daniel's face had gone completely white. For a moment the entire ballroom seemed to freeze. The music had stopped. The waiters stopped walking. Even the soft clinking of glasses faded into silence. Every single person in the room had turned toward the back of the hall, toward the small table beside the restroom, toward Maria and the man sitting calmly next to her, Victor Hale. Maria felt dozens, maybe hundreds of eyes staring at her. Her heart began beating faster. She leaned slightly toward Victor and whispered nervously, Did he just say your name?" Victor remained completely relaxed. "Yes," he said simply. Maria blinked in confusion. "But everyone is looking at you." Victor glanced around the room briefly before giving a small shrug. "That tends to happen sometimes." Up on the stage, the groom's father forced an awkward laugh into the microphone. "Mr. Hale," he called out politely, "sir, please join us at the front table." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Victor Hale was not just any guest. He was a powerful businessman whose companies were known across the country. The groom's family had been trying for months to impress him. Rumor had spread that Victor Hale was considering investing millions into their family business. And now the most important man in the room was sitting beside the restroom, at the worst table in the hall, next to a quiet woman in a simple blue dress. Maria, Daniel, the groom, stood near the front now, his expression stiff with panic. Sweat rolled slowly down the side of his face. He knew exactly what this meant, because a few minutes earlier he had whispered cruel words to the very woman sitting beside Victor Hale. Maria shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I think they want you to go up there," she said gently. Victor looked toward the stage. Then back at Maria. "They do," he said, "but I'm comfortable right here." Across the room, the groom's father was growing visibly anxious. He wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. "Mr. Hale," he said again into the microphone, his voice tighter now. "Please, sir, we prepared a seat for you at the main table." Victor slowly stood up from his chair. The entire ballroom watched him. His black suit caught the soft golden light from the chandeliers as he straightened his jacket. Maria looked up at him nervously. "I'm sorry if I caused trouble," she whispered. Victor looked down at her with a warm smile. "You didn't cause anything." Then he turned and began walking toward the stage. Guests parted quietly to make space for him. The room was completely silent now. Daniel stood frozen beside the stage, unable to move. Victor walked past him without even glancing in his direction. When he reached the microphone, the groom's father stepped aside quickly, forcing a wide smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said nervously, "please welcome Mr. Victor Hale." Polite applause filled the room. Victor took the microphone calmly. He looked out across the crowd. Then he spoke. "Good evening." His voice was steady and confident, easily filling the ballroom. "I appreciate the invitation tonight." The groom's father nodded eagerly beside him. Victor continued, "But before we celebrate the bride and groom," he paused for a moment, "there's something I'd like to say." The room became even quieter. Victor slowly looked toward the back of the ballroom, toward table 27, toward Maria. "I want to tell you a short story," he said. "A story about a woman." Guests glanced at each other curiously. Victor continued speaking. "Many years ago, when I was younger, I wasn't a successful businessman." A few people in the crowd leaned closer, listening carefully. In fact, Victor said calmly, "I was broke." Maria watched him from the back table, confused. Victor continued, "I had just lost my job. I had no money left. I was sleeping in my car and trying to survive however I could." The guests shifted uncomfortably. No one had expected this kind of speech. "One night," Victor said, "I walked into a small diner." His voice softened slightly. "I hadn't eaten for almost 2 days. Maria felt a strange flutter in her chest. Something about his words felt familiar. Victor continued, "I didn't have enough money to buy a meal, but I sat down anyway and asked for the cheapest coffee they had." The ballroom was completely silent now. Then Victor said quietly, a waitress noticed something. Maria's fingers slowly tightened around the edge of the table. She saw that I was hungry. Victor paused, and without asking for money, she brought me a full plate of food. Maria's breath caught in her throat. Victor's eyes found her across the room. That woman paid for my meal herself. A murmur spread through the crowd. Victor continued calmly, "She didn't know me. She didn't expect anything in return." Maria's eyes began filling with tears. Victor smiled slightly. "She just said something I never forgot." He paused, then repeated the words slowly. "Everyone needs a little help sometimes." Maria gasped softly. She remembered that night. It had been years ago. A tired man sitting alone at the counter, looking hungry, looking defeated, so she had given him food. That was all, nothing special, just kindness. Victor continued speaking. "That small act of kindness helped me through one of the worst moments of my life." The guests listened in stunned silence. Victor turned slightly and gestured toward the back of the ballroom. "Tonight, that same woman is sitting at the worst table in this room." All eyes turned again toward Maria. "She's sitting beside a restroom," Victor said calmly. Maria felt her cheeks burning, and yet, Victor continued, "She is the most honorable person here." The groom's father looked deeply uncomfortable now. Victor lowered the microphone slightly. Then he said something that made the entire room freeze. "I was planning to invest millions of dollars into the groom's family business." Daniel's heart seemed to stop. Hope flickered briefly across the groom's father's face, but Victor continued. However, his voice grew colder. "I also believe that the way people treat those who sacrificed for them reveals their true character." Daniel's face went pale. Victor's eyes moved slowly across the crowd. Then he finished the sentence. "So tonight I've decided to cancel that investment." A shocked gasp spread across the ballroom. The groom's father nearly stumbled backward. Daniel looked like he might collapse. Victor placed the microphone back onto the stand. Then he spoke one final sentence, "And the reason is sitting at table 27. A heavy silence fell over the ballroom. No one moved, no one spoke. Hundreds of guests sat frozen in their seats, still trying to process what had just happened. Victor Hale's words echoed in the air like a storm that had suddenly swept through the celebration. "I've decided to cancel that investment." The groom's father stood near the stage, his smile completely gone now. His face had turned pale, and his hands trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of the podium. Daniel, the groom, looked even worse. Just minutes earlier, he had whispered cruel words to Maria. Asterisk, "We can't seat you with the main guests, you're too poor." Asterisk, now those words felt like knives cutting through his own pride. And the entire room knew it. Victor stepped away from the microphone and calmly walked down from the stage. Guests moved aside automatically as he passed. No one dared to stop him. No one dared to speak. He walked directly back to the back of the ballroom. Back to the small table beside the restroom. Back to Maria. Maria sat there, stunned, her eyes still wet with tears. When Victor reached the table, he gently pulled the chair back and sat down again like nothing extraordinary had just happened. Maria looked at him with disbelief. You shouldn't have done that," she whispered nervously. Victor smiled softly. "Why not?" Maria shook her head. "This is my daughter's wedding," she said quietly. "I didn't want to cause trouble." Victor leaned forward slightly. "You didn't cause trouble," he said. "They did." Across the room, whispers had exploded into loud murmurs. Guests leaned toward one another, discussing what they had just witnessed. Many of them were now looking at Maria in a completely different way. Some even looked ashamed, because earlier they had ignored her. They had walked past her table as if she didn't exist. And now they realized something important. The quiet woman sitting beside the restroom had more dignity than anyone in the room. Near the stage, Daniel finally began walking toward the back of the ballroom. Each step felt heavier than the last. His father followed close behind, his face tight with frustration and panic. Several guests watched them approach Maria's table. Daniel stopped a few feet away. For a moment, he couldn't even look at Maria, but eventually he forced himself to speak. "Mrs. Maria," he said awkwardly. Maria looked up slowly. Her expression was calm now, tired but calm. Daniel swallowed. I think there has been a misunderstanding." Victor raised an eyebrow slightly, but said nothing. Daniel continued quickly. "You should be sitting at the main table with the family." Maria looked at him quietly. Just 10 minutes ago, he had told her she was too poor to sit with the guests. Now he was offering her the best seat in the room. Victor spoke before Maria could answer. "That's very generous," he said calmly. Daniel forced a nervous smile. "Yes, of course. She's the bride's mother, after all." Victor leaned back in his chair. Interesting. Daniel's father stepped forward, trying to recover the situation. "Mrs. Maria," he said politely, "we truly apologize if there was any confusion with the seating arrangement." Maria studied both men. For the first time that evening, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel embarrassed. She simply felt clear. She slowly stood up from her chair. The entire room seemed to be watching. Daniel's father smiled hopefully. "Yes, please come with us," he said, but Maria gently shook her head. No. The word was soft, but firm. Both men blinked in surprise. Maria looked around the ballroom, at the guests, at the stage, at her daughter standing across the room, watching with wide, tearful eyes. Then she spoke quietly. "I spent my entire life working so my children could stand proudly in rooms like this." Her voice trembled slightly, but she continued. "I worked night shifts. I cleaned houses. I skipped meals so they wouldn't go hungry. Some guests lowered their eyes." Maria continued, "I never felt poor." She looked directly at Daniel. Not until tonight. Daniel looked like someone had struck him. Maria took a slow breath. "But I realize something now." She lifted her chin slightly. "Being poor isn't about money." Her voice became stronger. "It's about how you treat people." No one in the room made a sound. Maria turned to Victor and smiled gently. "Thank you for remembering me," she said. Victor stood respectfully. "You helped me when I had nothing," he replied. "I simply returned the favor." Maria nodded. Then Victor looked at her thoughtfully. "You know," he said, "I run a foundation that helps struggling families and single parents." Maria listened quietly. "I've been looking for someone honest to help manage it." Victor continued. He smiled. "And I think I just found the perfect person." Maria's eyes widened slightly. "I'm not a businesswoman," she said softly. Victor chuckled. "You're something better." He extended his hand. "A good person." Maria looked at his hand for a moment. Then she took it. Across the room, whispers grew louder again, but this time they sounded different. Not judgmental, respectful. Some guests even began clapping quietly. Maria glanced once more toward her daughter. Their eyes met. The bride had tears streaming down her face now, but Maria didn't feel angry. She simply felt peaceful. For years she had believed she was just a poor woman who had struggled her entire life, but tonight she realized something powerful. Money could buy luxury, money could buy status, money could even buy a grand wedding like this one. But it could never buy dignity, and dignity was something she had never lost.